Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. Thanks for joining us. Iowa News and Views is a community affairs program focusing on state and local issues happening in and around Iowa. We would be interested in your ideas for shows and guests for shows and interested in your comments on how we're doing. This is show number 18. We are producing a show with all volunteers, and this show is being seen in 12 different metropolitan areas around the state of Iowa. I hope you'll keep joining us and tell your friends about us as well. Tonight's topic is 1997, the year of water, and basically it's a review of the last 10 years of how we in Iowa have addressed water quality issues statewide. And with us are two people, David Osterberg, former state representative from Mount Vernon, one of the authors of the 1997 Groundwater Protection Act, and Dennis Keeney, the director of the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture in Ames. Appreciate you both being with us.
Me too.
David, the 1987 Groundwater Protection Act established a variety of things for we in Iowa to take on to improve our water quality. What are some of those things we've done over the last 10 years?
Well, one of the things we did was set up centers at the three state universities. Here at the University of Iowa, there's a center called the Center for the Health Effects of Environmental Contamination, CHEEC. At UNI, there's a waste reduction center which works with businesses to help them reduce their wastes. And at Iowa State University, there is the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, and that's what Dennis is the director of.
Very good. Dennis, what goes on at the Leopold Center?
The center is a virtual center in a way. We have laboratories, or either laboratories of the universities and of the state. Our fields are the farm fields of the state. So we have a number of programs that are varied, as you might guess, with that kind of an outlook, ranging from interdisciplinary work, looking at riparian zones, the buffer strip issues, looking at how to grow swine in hoop houses so you don't have to use the intensive confinement systems.
I see.
And grazing, we have a lot of programs that are competitive grants, which we have every year, and then a lot of education demonstration programs.
So many programs to help people on the farm stay economically productive and protect the environment at the same time.
Basically,
it sounds
yeah.
like.
That would be exactly our outlook.
That's very good. I know a lot of folks living in cities are concerned about water quality, you know, the quality and taste and the like, but also the cost. I mean, in most communities over the last few years, we've seen very large increases in water bills. David, what, over the last 10 years as we've implemented the Groundwater Protection Act, what have been some of the success stories that we can, as we reflect on the year of water, can think we've done well at?
Well, we've done okay. I mean, when the Groundwater Protection Act was passed, it was sort of one of those landmarks in state legislation. Because we were very comprehensive, we looked at a number of ways in which groundwater was being contaminated, and we set up voluntary programs supported with fees on the people most likely to be causing the problem to fund them. We did very well on nitrogen fertilizer usage in the state of Iowa, although Dennis may have something to say about that now, but for a time we had reduced it significantly. And we've done a lot of work also on recycling in this state. Iowa's done more on recycling than most states have, and that's all funded through a tax on solid waste, which then goes directly back to these recycling programs.
I see. So in those programs have been very successful. The absence of that legislation on the recycling, and it seems like not a lot would be happening. In terms of the reduction in fertilizer on farms, which, you know, nitrates is a concern in water and trying to reduce the amount of nitrogen. What has been the story there, Dennis?
The story there has been since '87, the amount of nitrogen used on a per acre basis has dropped dramatically, as David has says, and it remains low to this day. Our rates are about 20% below those of surrounding states, especially Illinois, that we like to rate ourselves against. Our nitrogen fertilizer use this year, though, has taken a jump because of the more land in corn.
I see.
So you have total production, and you also have per acre. So we feel we're still going the right way, and our programs are still reaching the farmer the way they should.
Very good. What other stories are there this year with this year of water that we're trying to make Iowans aware of?
I think one we're really working on, I mentioned it briefly earlier, is how to protect our streams.
Okay.
Now, the Iowa Groundwater Protection Act didn't really address surface water, but streams do address surface water. And we're realizing more and more that stream protection is very important, and you're going to be seeing this also in federal programs as we go along with some help there. One of the reasons we're really concerned about streams is the fact that it does have such a major off-site impact. Groundwater contamination does affect local problems, whereas streams affect us downstream, and in fact there's good proof now that we are affecting the way things are going on in the Gulf of Mexico, increasing productivity there to the point where a lot of fish and shrimp are being damaged.
Is that right? There's a lot of private ground when we talk about stream protection, trying to work with basically private landowners. David, in your time in the legislature, the discussion about buffer strips or essentially paying farmers not to farm so close to streams and rivers was pretty controversial. How controversial is that today as we approach surface water protections?
Well, there seem to be a lot more federal programs happening in this area, and as the Conservation Reserve Program, which is one of the basic program to take land out of production, has been moving in the direction of more protection of water. So we've taken 36.5 million acres that was erodible, highly erodible land out of production. And the change going on in Washington is to move a lot of that into programs like buffer strips along streams.
How hard is that going to be to do, Dennis, in Iowa?
We're finding out that it might not even be something we'll have to pay for. We've got some programs where farmers are now voluntarily picking up on this idea and doing it on their own, because once they see what we can do and what we make available as demonstration sites, that wildlife increases, the streams have cleared up tremendously, and we can actually grow tree crops and crops that will actually make money on the zone. So you can actually do this and make money at the same time.
Very good. The Iowa Environmental Council has been very involved over the last year. The Iowa Environmental Council is a coalition of environmental and environmental groups, principally conservation organizations, that's been challenging us to take a look at some of these issues. I understand they have a conference coming up in November. David, what's going on here?
Yeah, Dennis sort of started this year of water, a year when we celebrate that it has been 10 years since the Groundwater Protection Act. And we ought to re-look at the kind of things we did back there to find out if we are still doing things to protect water. The last conference, and Dennis, I don't know how many conferences there have been this year.
Been a lot.
There are just a number.
Yeah.
The last one is one being put on November 20th in Des Moines by the Iowa Environmental Council. And the idea behind that one is to take some of the legislators who worked on the law the first time. I'm going to be there, and Representative Darrell Hansen, a Republican, and we're going to kind of pass the baton on to those legislators there now and asking them to go ahead and start their own programs to do the protecting of water in Iowa.
Very good.
Our reason behind starting the Year of Water was to not only celebrate the fact that we had 10 years of an excellent program, but to give us a chance to look ahead. And to do that, we needed people involved in this. So it was, while it's been coordinated through the center, the Leopold Center has taken a back seat in terms of publicity of this and gotten everybody else involved instead. And there's 70 groups have signed on to the Year of Water, and it's become a major rallying cry for a lot of these conferences, as Dave indicated. It's been extremely successful, and it shows if you can get out of the way, things work a lot better.
That's great. I know in 1987, when David and others were involved in passing this law, it was believed to be landmark legislation in the country, and we were the first to kind of take this on and struggle with water quality issues from farm considerations.
I think you'll hear from the Iowa Environmental Council and others that while it's landmark legislation, there is some unfinished business.
Sure. So in terms of the agricultural picture, Kendall Thu, who's a researcher at the University of Iowa, has noted in his research, he's done a lot of work in looking at large confinement and factory farming, and looks at trying to keep Iowa's rural economy strong, indicates that it's not how many hogs we produce, but how many people are producing them.
That's right.
And we have strong rural Iowa and rural communities in a stronger state when we have more people farming. What's the relationship between more people farming, Dennis, and dealing with good environmental practices?
Well, beyond just the strong rural environment and strong rural communities that we'd have with more people around, also, as it's been put, there's more eyes to the acre. I think Wes Jackson has said that. There's more people out there practicing conservation. And it takes just a short reading of the land ethic and some of the other writings that Leopold has put together in Sand County Almanac to realize that this was also his teachings, that we have to have people on the land to manage it properly, and that private landowners actually can do a far better job than the government.
I see. David, you were the chair of the House Agricultural Committee when you served in the Iowa legislature. Are we going the wrong way with these large factory farming operations, and how can we turn that around?
Well, I think I'm very uncomfortable with the size, just because it seems to be turning things away from as Dennis was talking about, the private landowner taking care of his or her own piece, and moving into a much larger kind of corporate structure. I'm more interested, I think, in the corporate structure than I am size, essentially. I think you can have a large size and still really take care of things, but you need to have somebody there who really worries about it. And a few weeks ago, when you and I talked about some of the recent articles in the Des Moines Register, there's 7 major spills in the state of Iowa. 2 of them come out of the DeCoster works up in Hardin County. I think that that demonstrates that some people aren't taking as good care as they could. So it's not so much size, I think, but the structure of that. And that's at least what I'd say.
And our work is oriented towards finding alternative ways to grow swine that can keep the smaller farmer in business and prove that it can be done profitably.
Great.
So this is the way the Leopold Center has really looked at things all the way through, is find the alternate route that's economical and environmentally safe.
Sure, sure. Well, this issue is both an environmental one, but I believe it's probably an economic one at its heart. I mean, the environmental stuff is very concerned to me, and others, but it's keeping people on land is an economic question as much as anything. There was a conference in Des Moines a number of weeks ago on sustainable communities, and there are a number of people there talking about organic agriculture. What role does that play in addressing water quality issues?
We're looking at organic agriculture through the Leopold Center as a niche market, for one thing. It's something that can be developed. We're also looking at it as a good test bed for finding ways of alternate pest control and alternate nutrient management. We've got a lot of farmers who are not organic, but they are using these alternate technologies, and they can be improved on as we study organic agriculture in its fullest sense. So I see it as playing 2 very important roles for us: a way to farm with less chemical intensity, and a way to provide good markets for people that want to provide them that way.
Very good. Well, getting back to the question of hogs and size, ag drainage wells have been an issue in the press over the last number of months. What's the status of that, David, right now?
Yeah, actually, ag drainage wells are, first of all, to explain for a moment, there were parts of Iowa that were so poorly drained that when you tried to get the water out so you could actually farm, instead of moving the water towards streams which weren't available, you dug a hole, a cistern, and put water right down into the aquifer. Now that I don't think was a very good agricultural practice in the 1900s when they did it, and it became a much worse agricultural practice when we used so many more chemicals. So ag drainage wells I don't think are a very good idea. However, we're stuck with 400 or 500 of them. But this while we couldn't in the 1987 bill do very much, the Iowa Environmental Council in this last session of the legislature at least began to deal with these by putting ag drainage wells together with these very large hog confinements, showing that these lagoons could leak and really contaminate some of these underground water supplies through the ag drainage wells. And so the legislature spent about $1.5 million per year, starting this year, to close 20 of them that are the most dangerous.
Very good. You're watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. We're visiting about 1997, the year of water, and efforts to redouble our efforts to deal with water quality issues in and around our state. Our guests are 2 experts in our state, David Osterberg, former state legislator from Mount Vernon, and Dennis Keeney, the director of the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture. We're pleased to have them with us to talk about this important question. David, what areas, after seeing 10 years pass and some improvements made, what areas do you feel we should focus on at this point in time?
Well, again, I think we can get off agriculture a little bit because it's one of the things that is dangerous, but there are many other things that Iowans do that all are potential contaminants. And to talk again about what the philosophy behind the '87 Groundwater Act was, it was that if you give people information and you give them opportunities, Iowans will do the right thing. And an example of that is in recycling. We put a fee on garbage. The amount of waste that goes to landfill is taxed at about 4 1/4 per ton. That money then comes back to the state, which distributes it to people who have good ideas on how to reduce the amount of waste. The last figures I saw were the beginning of 1996. About $11 million had gone to county agencies, to local cities, and about $11 million had gone to private firms. Anybody who came up with a good idea to reduce the amount of waste going to a landfill could get a grant from the state, and we started a lot of businesses that way.
Great. I know of a number of those that did get grant money.
And we've had some goals. We said that by 1994 we passed the '87 bill. It was followed by another one in '89, and in '89 we said that by 1994, which was 5 years, we ought to have reduced our waste going to landfills by 25%, and we did. We're now looking at a more difficult goal, which is to reduce it by 50% by the year 2000. Now, I don't know if we're going to make that, but it's certainly a goal that's out there that makes people continue to move towards programs that are going to just reduce waste, and that, in effect, is going to make us less liable to be contaminating our natural resources.
Very good. I know that goal, the discussion of that goal in this last legislative session, there was some discussion about eliminating that goal, which I think is a bad idea.
I think it's a terrible idea.
We ought to have some goals out there. Whether we can attain them or not, we should have some target to shoot for. Dennis, what are going to be some of the priorities of the Leopold Center in the coming year?
As we see it, Joe, we're going to have to spend maybe our next decade working on landscape and watershed issues. We need the practices, we need to work on those and improve them, but we have to have them adopted. And the piece-by-piece adoption is it's slow and ineffective and sometimes doesn't stick. We're finding, and this is a nationwide trend, that if you do involve the people in the watershed to protect their watershed, why things move a lot better because you get buy-in from cities, you get buy-in from the rural areas, and you get buy-in from the farmers. And defining those watersheds is going to be more and more difficult. Des Moines has defined their watershed now as Raccoon River watershed, because that's what's supplying their water. But we're going to see U.S. EPA, I think, define a watershed as Mississippi River.
Is that right?
They're beginning to move that way now in some regulatory, just some discussions at least. Now you're talking about 40-some% of the United States and most of our production. And so this watershed concept is not that easy to get a handle around, but we're going to have to look that way rather than individual farms even.
Sure. We're all connected, in the watershed.
Right.
L.D. McMullen was a guest on the show formerly and talked about his work in trying to do watershed protection. Here in Iowa City, we're in the Iowa River watershed, and we're building a new water plant for $50 million. I wonder if it wouldn't be worth spending a few $1 million upstream on buffer strips along the Iowa and its tributaries to get some benefit out of that. How do you educate folks about watershed protection? It's not real new to people like yourselves that are professionals in the field, but how do we educate the community about all the things going on in the watershed and their impact on water quality?
I think, Joe, what we're finding out is even the word educate might not be the right word anymore, learning. And we're going out more and more and learn what they know and what they want to know and what we can do for them, and trying to apply what we've learned from them to their watersheds in terms of today's technologies and today's needs. And this Leopold Center is moving. I think a lot of places are moving towards being learning organizations as opposed to the old educational top-down organizations.
I see. David, do we put enough money into these programs, either at the federal or state level, to make the kind of progress that you would like to see?
Well, I think Iowa is much more beautiful now than it was formerly, and that's mainly because of money coming out of Washington, the NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service. has been spending a lot of money on helping farmers farm better. The CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, has taken a lot of land out that probably shouldn't have been farmed anyway. And so you don't see this monocrop of just all corn. You see lots of diversity, and I think we've just done a lot in the last 10 years. At the state level, a lot more can be done too. Look at the state of Illinois, which is not noted for its voluntary programs to help people do things. They're much more regulatory. They started a program a couple of years ago where they spent they will spend $100 million on programs which are mainly voluntary. Partly they're doing the things that Iowa does very well on soil conservation. But another is to take a basin, make sure that all the groups who are interested in doing something in that basin come together in a group. They then apply to their DNR and get grants. They won't allow one of these things to happen until you get the Farm Bureau and the Audubon and the Sierra Club all going in the same direction. They decide that this is something they want to protect, some water resources that they think is important. They make that decision. They then get in the pool of people competing for that money. And I think it's a wonderful new program, and I wish we'd adopt it in the state of Iowa.
That sounds great. So we're getting down towards the end of our time. Any final messages about particularly to folks in urban areas where this show plays, about what role they can play to get more involved in helping in their part of the watershed to address water quality issues?
Well, I think one thing they can do when they walk through their garden store is to be careful what chemicals they're buying and what they're putting on, and see if they're really needed. Another thing is to try and buy their food locally, support their local infrastructures as much as they can, and this might cost a little more and it might not. And also, I think, just be aware of what's going on. Also, watch out for the developers that are taking a lot of our prime land out of production.
David?
Well, here in Johnson County, the Non-Farmer's Guide to Agriculture, which is partly sponsored by the Leopold Center, is one way that urban people can know a whole lot more about farming.
Sure. Non-Farmer's Guide has been a very important program to bring people in the urban area out onto the farm and kind of see it. There's a lot of folks that don't get that experience. We're not that disconnected from the farm, but if you don't know farmers in your community or in your county, it's hard to get out there and actually see what is going on. So that's been a very important program. Dennis, you raised the question about urban sprawl, so buzzword in terms of eating up ag land. How big a problem is that in
It's
Iowa?
hard to get your hand around it yet because we have a highly productive system here, and every time we need more corn, it seems we just able to apply a little more technology, but that can't last forever. And we're seeing a lot of disparate groups come together now and really be concerned about ag land preservation in this state. I think it's a very important issue in the future.
Very good. We've had Ed Fallon on the show, state representative from Des Moines, who's been very involved in that issue. We think of our state as kind of having an infinite amount of agricultural ground, and I know in this county we see a lot of plans for developments on farm ground, and it's a struggle trying to prevent those from going in. I know Lynn County has that same issue up in your neighborhood, David.
You bet, and I think the people are coming together on protecting the resources, whether that's the water resources or that's productive farmland. Iowa was blessed with some of the largest amount of good farmland, not in America, but in the world, and we can't waste that.
Well, I know we occasionally talk about it in terms of highly erodible ground versus prime farmland, and I suspect that some of our highly erodible ground is still better than 90% or better ground in the world.
They kill for that in China.
Exactly. Exactly. It's something that we should definitely be protecting. On the federal level, we've seen some changes in the farm program. Do we see any help there on this question of farmland protection?
I've not seen any. Have you, David?
Well, the last farm bill had something that American Farmland Trust helped to get in. It's very small, about $35 million out of billions of dollars in the farm bill. But that was to help programs which preserved farmland, sometimes by paying the farmer his or her development rights for the land, to make sure that you allow that person to continue to farm without having nosy neighbors around, and at the same time gain some of that increment in value, and also keeping the land taxed at agriculture. When you can put those together in many programs they've done, mainly in the state of Maryland and other East Coast states, but there's some interesting things that could happen here in Iowa too, I think.
you have a comment on that?
Nope, that's
No,
fine. I
got
think
that?
I've seen that happen in Wisconsin to some extent already. They've had that program for over a decade, and it's working.
Very good. We've been visiting with former State Representative David Osterberg. I suppose you're always a state representative once you're a state representative, maybe not. And Dennis Keeney, the director of the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Two people have been working for a very long time to address water quality issues in our state, and we're pleased to have you both with us this evening on Iowa News and Views. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'd like to encourage you to check out our webpage. We'll give you the address in a second. We've got some things about what we're up to here. We are a public affairs program seen in 12 metropolitan areas around the state of Iowa, trying to bring you information on local and state issues of concern to Iowans. We'd be interested in your ideas for guests on the show and topics for the show. We've talked a little bit tonight about surface water issues. We have a show that we're planning in the coming weeks here on Mississippi River issues and concern about that body of water. So we hope you'll check that out. We're on every week. The time you're seeing us, tune in next time to see what we're up to again. Again, you've been watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. Remember, this is just a TV program. What's important is what you're doing each and every day in your community to make it a better place to live. Water quality is the topic tonight. We hope you'll think about that and get out there and work in your community to make for better water quality. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again.